Does Last Epoch need trade? Now, personally, I love trading in MMOs and ARPGs. In many MMOs, I pretend to be a merchant, and when it comes to ARPGs, I'm perfectly happy to be a hideout warrior. So, when Last Epoch originally talked about their bazaar, in my mind, I imagined a system much like the Falador Gardens back in the old days of RuneScape, with dozens or hundreds of players all shouting and trying to sell their wares. You'd walk in, and to your left there'd be the high-value items. Someone's selling an Orions today, and that's a really big deal. Over to your right, that's the section where everyone gathers to sell exalted things, and you do happen to need a new amulet. Oh, there's one with exalted void penetration, for only 6,000? The last couple days haven't been that great and my purse is a little light. So you walk up to them. Hey, would you take 3,500 and my bleeding heart? I know it's not the best item, but I'm really short on money right now. And you haggle back and forth, ultimately agreeing that the bleeding heart isn't worth all that much. Maybe it's not really good for their build, but they will take your old katana. It's got 4 T5 mods, and it's a perfectly suitable replacement for their offhand. Of course, this could just be the nostalgia talking. Another perfectly valid interpretation of a bazaar would instead be player-run shops. You set a bunch of items up, an NPC sells them for you, and if you want to browse through, you'll talk to the NPC, the player can come back and collect their money later. But one thing's for certain. Last Epoch was originally going to have trade, and that excited me. It was one of the factors behind why I wanted to check the game out over a year ago. And right now the discussion around trade is pretty polarized. Personally, I think a lot of the nuance is being lost by both extremes. Last Epoch isn't a completely dead game without trade, though it may very well limit the monetization options available to EHG along with the size of the audience. Something that honestly might not be a bad thing from their perspective, since not all games have to be made for everyone. But on the other hand, the game doesn't have to change dramatically just because trade exists. Especially if the goal isn't to present a quote-unquote hardcore competitive experience. In fact, trade could enhance the game for even a casual player. You might have found something really awesome for a build that a lot of people like that really isn't your playstyle. Me personally, I'm not a big fan of minions, so even if I got the best minion item in the game, I wouldn't be super thrilled about it. Now, maybe I'm in a party with a friend who plays minions, in which case, cool, I'll just gift it to them. But if not, being able to sell it and buy something that's relevant for my build would be really great. And while the option for me to become a merchant might be open, the game design doesn't have to be such that it's necessary. And this begs the question, do you need trade to keep an ARPG alive? And I would say it depends. Because in Path of Exile, trade is a core part of a game's design. That's why, for example, you can migrate from solo self-found back to a trade league. That's why Standard exists. And that's why there aren't soul-bound items, or at least there weren't until Forbidden Sanctum. Trade influences Path of Exile's design on every level. This is why playing solo self-found doesn't give you an advantage. Instead, it's a self-imposed limitation that makes the game much more difficult. And similarly, Torchlight Infinite, another fairly new action RPG, is also designed and balanced around trade. Many of the rarest build-enabling items are simply too rare to achieve in a reasonable amount of time, at least if you're expecting them to drop off the ground. Sure, you can power farm for precious legendary items, and that definitely raises your odds, but you also can't count on finding an eternity. Every season, a few lucky players will, and most people absolutely won't. Again, trade is a core part of Torchlight Infinite, and solo self-found's probably going to be a very limiting experience, but that's not by accident, it's by design. But on the other hand, Grim Dawn is a highly successful and beloved indie action RPG, with no trade at all. At least, no trade in the sense of an always online multiplayer game as a service. And so, this is where things get complicated, because it depends on your design. For games as a service, ARPGs like Path of Exile, Torchlight Infinite, and most likely Diablo 4, the economy acts like a glue, bringing players back season after season to try new builds and beat their previous records. So, if EHG plans to stick to their originally posed idea of releasing content in cycles, I think they'll need an economy. They're going to need that glue binding players together. On the other hand, while it does have a fan-run season, Grim Dawn isn't really a seasonal game. Most of the time, new content comes via DLC, and that's what players want. That's what causes people to pick the game up. and that's why I returned to it. If Last Epoch plans for future development to be paid for via expansions, with small fixes and updates in between, rather than as a live service, no, I don't think it needs trade. And to go a step further, I would say that the item gifting is an excellent start for playing with friends. Ultimately, I don't know what 11th Hour Games is going to decide, but personally, as someone who does enjoy trade, I'm very happy that they've opened the discussion. Recently, they released a poll talking about trade in Last Epoch, and asking players for their thoughts on various metrics. Do you want trade with your friends? Do you want trade with strangers? Do you want trade directly, indirectly, via NPCs? There's several other questions, even including would you want the amount of loot dropped to be reduced, i.e. would you want the solo experience to be changed by trade existing? If you have any strong opinions on that, I suggest voting in the poll. It's a great way to tell EHG what you want for Last Epoch's future. And I'm really glad that they've opened this discussion. I think it's only been possible due to the constructive feedback that they've seen on their forums and elsewhere. I know these days a lot of feedback is far from constructive, and it's certainly not helping anyone to say the game is dead or the developer sucks. And that's why I appreciate and respect all the developers who do look for the constructive feedback in all the other online sludge, and then change their decisions accordingly. For me personally, I'm going to be disappointed if Last Epoch doesn't have trade and an economy. I'll probably play the game less, only looking to come back for major expansions or really big updates. That doesn't mean the game's doomed, and it doesn't even mean it's a bad experience. After all, Grim Dawn's done just fine. And the game doesn't need to be for everyone. It needs to find a core audience and do whatever makes them happy. But on the other hand, I believe a lot of the people saying that the game will be ruined by trade are simply an overly vocal minority. And that most players would like to have the option, even if it's not the dominant choice. Even if Last Epoch is designed primarily as a solo self-found first game that has trade as an option for those who really want it. Personally, I don't think Last Epoch is supposed to be a super competitive game. And even if trade might trivialize the gearing experience, I don't think that's really a problem because offline mode with mod support is going to do that anyway. If you really want an item generator, it's not going to be hard to have that. But on the other hand, if you just want to use trade to swap items around and put together a really cool build with an idea you had, maybe sell off that nice item that just isn't something for a playstyle you enjoy, and pick up that 4LP legendary you've been eyeing, I think that would be a great addition. And because the game isn't intended to be a competitive experience, I think there's a lot more room to have trade without adjusting drop rates. Something that seems to be the main concern here, at least in comparison to games like Path of Exile and Torchlight Infinite. But remember, Path of Exile is a PvP game, where your DPS is measured in divines, and the hit points are measured in all the hours you lost on a failed farming strategy. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts in regards to Last Epoch and trade? And remember, keep it civil and keep it constructive. But as long as you can follow those two simple rules, do be sure to share your thoughts down in the comments below. On the other hand, if you're curious about my thoughts on Last Epoch's multiplayer update and 0.9 as a whole, do get subscribed while you're down there, leave a like, since I'm going to be talking about that in an upcoming video, along with possibly showcasing my build a bit. Before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for their continued support. If you want something else to watch, there's going to be a recommendation on screen, and I'll have a couple other videos that are somewhat related to this topic in the card and down in the description below. If you happen to be a big fan of Grim Dawn, I have checked the game out previously, and I'm hoping to get a video out sometime in the future. And on the other hand, if you like this video essay discussion format, you might like my second channel, 10 Gaming Thoughts, where I have a whole bunch of videos like this on other gaming topics. But that's all for me today. Thank you for watching, I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.